I'm going to be talking about the structure of the heart as well as the blood vessels leading to and from it, which is actually relevant for both IGCSE and A-level. In A-level, it's topic 1B4, and in IGCSE, it's the circulation chapter, which is chapter 5. And then for A-level students, I'll do a second video that talks about the cardiac cycle, the idea of the contractions of the heart and where those are happening. But I'll put that in a separate video because this one is aimed towards both levels, all right? So the heart, this is a mammalian heart. It has 4 chambers. The 2 at the top here, these are both atria, and the ones at the bottom are the ventricles, all right? So, and the idea is that when you're looking at a heart, the left and right have been switched. So it's as if it were sitting in your own chest and not as if you're looking at it. So that means that this is the right side and this is the left side. Okay. And so then you have the right atrium. If you're talking about both atria, so the plural of it is atria. Okay, and then this is going to be your left atrium. And then here on the bottom, you have the left and right ventricles. Okay. And then you also need to know the 4 blood vessels that are entering and leaving the heart. Okay, so the idea is that if you remember that on the right side, you're dealing with deoxygenated blood, so blood that is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. And that means that it's come from the body, right? So it's already been to the respiring tissues and so it's picked up a bunch of oxygen, or sorry, it's picked up a bunch of carbon dioxide and it's dropped off most of its oxygen. And on the left side, we have oxygenated blood, so blood that's high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. And the easy way to remember that is the mnemonic Dr. Low. So if you remember Dr. Low, then you'll always remember which side is the right and also which side has the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Okay. So then the blood vessels. So the idea is that, so blood that has been all around the body and picked up carbon dioxide and dropped off oxygen enters into the right atrium, and it does so through this. It's called the vena cava. You have a superior and an inferior, but at no level do you need to truly understand the difference. You can always just use the term vena cava. So this is called the vena cava. Okay, and it enters into the right atrium, and then from the right atrium, it passes into the right ventricle. Now, in order to do that, it passes through these valves here, okay? And in IGCSE, you just need to know that they are valves. You don't need to know the name of them. In A-level, in AS, you want to make sure that you understand that this is an atrioventricular valve, which you can abbreviate AV. It is, in fact, the tricuspid valve, but most mark schemes aren't going to fault you if you just write AV or atrioventricular. So you can just call it that. Now, the other thing that you can see on this diagram here is this. These are the tendons, all right? And tendons you'll find on each side of everywhere there's a valve, there's going to be a tendon in the heart. And the reason for the tendons is that they allow, they prevent the valve from basically inverting on itself. So you want valves, so these valves open to allow blood to go from the atria to the ventricle. And the idea is that then when the blood needs to go into the pulmonary artery or into the aorta in this case, you don't want those valves inverting, and the tendons prevent that from happening. So they prevent the valves from inverting or turning the wrong way. Okay, so that's the purpose of them. The valve, of course, itself, the purpose of all valves in the heart, and I'll get to the others in a moment, is that they prevent the blood from going in the wrong direction. So they make sure that the blood doesn't flow backwards. And that's not just true for the AV valve. right? It's critically important, and of course, veins also have valves, but it's critically important in the heart that the blood is going to be going the direction you want. Otherwise, it's just going to be kind of squished around in the heart, and you're not actually pumping it anywhere to the tissues and to the lungs where it's needed to go. So the blood then goes from the right ventricle into this blood vessel here. So you can see here, and you can also see a branch of it here behind the vena cava, and this is the aorta. And so this is the pulmonary artery. It is the only artery in the body normally that carries deoxygenated blood. So arteries typically carry oxygenated blood, and the pulmonary artery is the exception to that. All right, so since it's carrying deoxygenated blood, I'll label it in blue. And so this is the pulmonary artery. Okay, and again, this is the other branch of it here, right? Because you have two lungs, and so the idea is this is going to the lungs, and so you've got one going to the left lung and one going to the right upper lung. So this splits as soon as it leaves. Now you can see another set of valves here, and again, for IGCSE, you just need to know their valves, but for A level, you need to know the name of them, and they are the semilunar valves. Okay, and you've got another pair of them leading into the aorta. So the AV valve and the semilunar valves, there's two sets of each. One set on the right side of the heart, one set on the left side of the heart. Okay, so the blood goes to the lungs, and at the lungs you have gas exchange. So oxygen is going to diffuse into the blood, and CO2 will diffuse out, and then it comes back to the heart, and it's going to come back to the heart via the pulmonary vein. Now, the pulmonary vein, it comes in sets of two. So this is also pulmonary vein on this side. Again, it's coming back from either the right or left lung. Okay, so these are your pulmonary veins. And I'm putting it in red because now it's carrying oxygenated blood. Again, it's the only vein in the body normally that carries oxygenated blood. Veins usually carry deoxygenated blood and are going, but all veins are going to the heart, so that's why. So this is going to the heart, and the pulmonary vein drops off the blood in the left atrium, where it then goes from the atrium to the ventricle. All right. Now, again, you can see you have tendons here, and you also have another AV valve. Okay. Remember, AV stands for atrioventricular, so both of these can be called AV valves. Like I said, this one is actually the tricuspid. If you want to know that, it's good to know, but you don't have to. And this one over here is called the bicuspid, but it's also an AV valve, so I'll put bicuspid in parentheses there. Okay, and then it goes into the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle it goes into the aorta. And if you feel like you get disoriented, right, because this is one example of the structure of the heart in terms of the diagram, but the exams can show you lots of different more cartoonish versions or more anatomical versions like this one is. And so the way you might want to orient yourself, right, is this aorta always has this, it's called the aortic arch. It's very distinctive. Okay, and you can see, so from the left ventricle into the aorta, you can't actually see, and actually you can't really see you can barely just see the semilunar valves here leading into the aorta, but it does have them. All right. And so the idea is that this aortic arch is one of the things that you can use to orient yourself. None of the other blood vessels are going to have that very stereotypical arch here. The other thing is you want to make sure you can see what is leading into what. So you will always be able to distinguish the four chambers, right? The two atria and the two ventricles. And so then from there, you want to make sure that you can follow the blood. So this is leading into the right atrium. Well, that means it must be the vena cava. Here, this is obviously exiting directly from the right ventricle, and so that must be the pulmonary artery. So you want to orient yourself on things like that. So this is the aorta, okay? And then you have your ventricles. Now, the other thing you can notice, because they love questions like this, is if you look at the walls of the four chambers, okay, you'll notice that the left ventricle wall is much, much thicker, so it has a lot more muscle in it. And the reason for that is because from the aorta, from the left side of the heart, the blood is traveling to the rest of the body. So you need a lot of muscle here in order to when it contracts, to create that high blood pressure that's going to deliver the oxygen and glucose and whatever else is in the blood that your cells need in a fast and efficient manner. So that's they really like to ask questions about that. The other thing is this part in the middle here. This is called the septum. And I don't think you need to know that for IGCSE. I can't quite remember. But you definitely need to know it for AS level. And the idea is that the septum is the muscle that divides, the part of the muscle that divides the right and the left sides of the heart. And it's critically important because by separating these two sides of the heart, you're making sure that the freshly oxygenated blood from the lungs and the deoxygenated blood from the body do not mix. And why do you care about that? It's because when then the blood goes wherever it's going, so either to the blood, or sorry, to the lungs to pick up oxygen, or to the respiring tissues to drop off oxygen, the idea is that the concentration gradient is um, a lot higher than if the blood mixed. And so, and the higher the concentration gradient, then the faster diffusion will occur. Remember that gas exchange, as well as the dropping off of oxygen in the respiring tissues, happens via diffusion. All right. If you're an A level, then you should be invoking Fick's law when you are talking about the idea of having to separate the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. If you're not in A level, you don't have to worry about that law, but you do have to understand the idea that by separating the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, what you're doing is allowing the concentration gradient to be larger, and that helps diffusion go faster. So you don't need the law for it, but you should certainly understand the concept. All right. So then from this, by understanding the structure of the heart, you should be able to do things like be able to talk about, okay, well, which of these blood vessels going into or leaving the heart is going to have for example, the highest CO2 concentration, okay? And that would be the vena cava, because this is right before it leaves to go pick up oxygen in the lungs, all right? Maybe they ask about blood pressure, okay? So the vena cava is a vein. It's going to have much lower blood pressure than any of the arteries. And also, it's getting returned to the heart from the body. And so this is going to have the lowest blood pressure. The highest blood pressure would be found here in the aorta, because remember that that is directly after this very thick left ventricle. And so you're going to have the highest blood pressure in the aorta, okay? This the pulmonary vein and the aorta are also going to have very high levels of oxygen, because they will have just come from the lungs, where it will have picked up oxygen and dropped off CO2. So the idea with this is that if they ask you about the relative concentrations of oxygen or carbon dioxide or blood pressure, by understanding the movement of the blood through the heart and what is happening and where it's going, what is its destination, the blood's destination, you should be able to then answer questions about where you find, the highest amount of CO2 or high amounts of oxygen, or high and low blood pressures. All right, so that's it for the structure of the heart, but I'll use this diagram if you're interested in the cardiac cycle for AS stuff, then I'll make a separate video on that.